and welcome to Alliance of Indiana's first annual conference on domestic violence, entitled Culture and Compassion, Understanding, Serving, and Empowering Immigrant Victims of Domestic Violence. My name is Lubaba Abdullah, and I am the Women's Director at the Muslim Alliance of Indiana. So I work part-time at MA doing doing outreach to the Muslim community, and then I work part-time at the Julian Center doing immigration law. And so as a result of this training, what we hope is that you'll be able to understand and relate to the diverse immigrant cultures in America, particularly Muslim culture, and then to recognize how culture and faith impacts both service providers and the victims of violence. We hope that you will be able to identify and find solutions to the obstacles that service providers face in assessing immigrant victims of violence, and to identify and discuss the unique dynamics of victims, of those that have different backgrounds, and the types of abuse within the immigrant communities. Just a few housekeeping items. All the lectures will be held in here today. Lunch will be served across the hall in the Golden Ballroom 5 and 7. Bathrooms are outside and to the left. And then for those of you guys who are getting the continuing education unit certificates, they will be, for those of you who are planning on only attending today, please pick yours up at the tables by registration at the end of the day. For those of you who are planning on attending tomorrow, go ahead and pick it up tomorrow, and we have one certificate with both days and all of the hours. Without further ado, let me go ahead and introduce our keynote speaker, Ann DeLaney. Ann DeLaney is a founding partner of DeLaney & DeLaney. Before entering private practice, Ann served as the deputy prosecuting attorney in Marion County, Indiana. She also served as a commissioner in the Marion Superior Court and is a special prosecutor in Tippecanoe County, Indiana. She has argued cases before the United States Court of Appeals for the 7th Judicial Circuit and the Supreme Court of Indiana. She has been recognized as an Indiana super lawyer and has also been awarded an AV peer review rating by LexisNexis Martindale Hubbell for ethical standards and legal ability. Ann has been the executive director of the Julian Center since 1996. Under her leadership, the agency budget and assets have more than tripled to over $3.5 million. During her tenure, Ann led a $7.5 million capital campaign to build a new and larger domestic violence shelter in Indianapolis. The facility was completed in 2001, doubling the number of clients the Julian Center shelter could serve each year. Her administrative, legal, and political skills have enabled her to work effectively with the client's board of directors, staff, and community partners in a collaborative effort to support the mission of the Julian Center. She is responsible for the overall management of the agency's day-to-day operations, fundraising, fiscal health and management, public relations, and interfacing with the board of directors and the public. Without further ado, I will turn the podium over to her.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you. My name is Ann DeLaney, and I am the Executive Director of the Julian Center, and I thought what I'd do this morning is talk a little bit about what we are and how we've gotten to where we are. I know the emphasis here is on the cultural differences for clients that we seek, and we've seen a lot of changes in the Julian Center in the 15 years I've been there. Wave after wave of new immigrants with all of the cultural challenges that those new waves present to us. We've tried to adapt to that as much as we can. We obviously could do better, and we could always use help in But domestic violence is an equal opportunity offender. It does not matter the cultural background, the religion, the socioeconomic level you come from, or even the educational level that you come from. Most of the time, and that's the overwhelming majority, 95 to 98% of the victims that we see are female. It does happen the other way. There are male victims, and there are same-sex victims as well. But the Julian Center started out as an agency of the Episcopal Diocese 35 years ago. And we were a resource center for women. What they quickly realized is that no one in central Indiana, believe it or not, was doing therapeutic counseling for the survivors of sexual assault. Nobody. So they quickly developed a series of counselors with master's degrees who could help victims of sexual assault. In 1982, United Way and Lilly Endowment came to the Julian Center and asked us to open the first Central Indiana domestic violence shelter, which we did. And for 20 years, we were in a converted Roman Catholic convent on the west side of downtown, in a facility originally designed to house 14 nuns with one communal bathroom and no commercial kitchen. And when I started in this job 15 years ago, people would say to me, how can women stay in abusive relationships? And I'd say, look, if you could see the obstacles that we place in their path of choosing safety, you'd turn the question on its head. Can you imagine moving with your children in the dead of night with the clothing that you have on your back and nothing else, and then living in a room with children with the bathroom down the hall for 3 or 4 months until accommodations can be found for you? So what we wanted to do when we took over the Julian Center in 1996 was to look at what facilities were there and look at how many obstacles Central Indiana placed in the way of victims choosing safety. And when we realized at the Julian Center then we were serving about 650 women and children a year at the shelter, another 600 at the counseling center, we decided at that point, thank you, we decided at that point that we were turning away more women and children than we were serving. And we were hidden away. And the notion was that being hidden away was the way domestic violence shelters were supposed to operate. Our view on that was a little different. We thought that when we were hidden away, we were allowing Central Indiana to ignore a very large problem. Because as you know, when you look at this question, 28 to 32% of the murder rate in any metropolitan area is directly related to domestic violence. So we were hidden away. People didn't know we existed. To the extent that they knew that we existed, they weren't sure how big a problem it was. We decided to turn that dynamic on its head by building a new shelter more than twice the size on the main street in downtown Indianapolis and publicizing the location. To say that that sent a shockwave through the advocate community would be a gross understatement. But it allowed us to focus attention on an issue that had been too long ignored. When I started in this job, I remember doing an interview with a TV reporter who used to cover the beat at the City County building. And he could recall, and he wasn't that old, believe me, he was in his he could recall being on assignment to the City County building in Indianapolis and being dispatched to a murder, and leaving with his cameraman to go cover the scene of the crime, the scene of the murder, and then being called back by his director and told that it was domestic, it wasn't worth covering. That was 20 years ago in this town. That's what part of the impetus behind changing the dynamic of domestic violence, bringing it out in the open and focusing attention on it. We also use, as you will do with collaborations, you seize opportunities as they present themselves. And every cloud, as they say, does have a silver lining. In 1998, Indianapolis experienced a record murder rate. It was off the charts. It was an issue politically, and it was a big, big concern among voters. So we went to the mayor, then Steve Goldsmith, and the chief of police, then Chief Zunk, and said, there's little you can do with the fact that Indiana is situated between Michigan and Mexico, and there's a lot of drug stuff going on. There's little you can do about that. But domestic violence does count for 28 to 32% of the murder rate right here in this record year, and you can do something about that. Nashville, Tennessee was the first community to create a specialized investigative unit for domestic violence, remove it from the normal police department facility, and locate it somewhere out in the community which was more friendly to the users. That was important for two reasons. First, because of user access, but also because of the fact that Nashville and a number of police agencies around the country recognize the fact that if you wear a uniform, you're 40% more likely to be an offender in the first place. So what we were experiencing was, when police did come, they would identify with the perpetrator and not the victim. Talk about having a chilling effect on her willingness to prosecute. We wanted to change that dynamic. And the way to do that was create a specialized unit, have them apply for it, have them specially trained, and they said, okay, well, we can do that, we can do that. And then they said, but we don't know where to put them. And the Julian Center said, well, you know, we're building this building, and we have this second floor that isn't fully occupied. How about you take that? They said, okay, but they had no money to make that second floor usable. I said, well, how about we raise the money and we amortize it over your lease, and we give you a lease at below market rate. And they said, well, that sounds pretty good. So they moved in, and they moved in with a lot of trepidation. The police officers and advocates in the domestic violence area are usually like this, for a variety of reasons. Many times victims will refuse to prosecute, and that is very frustrating to law enforcement. It's very frustrating to law enforcement because the danger to law enforcement to going to the scene of domestic violence is substantial, that they could get caught in this violence and be injured. And when they do that, and then the victim drops the charges, they're very frustrated. So you've got those kinds of conflicts going on. You've got the fact that if they wear the uniform in the first place, they may be offenders going on. And they moved in, and we went out of our way to make them feel welcome. Our rule of thumb was, if you feed them, they will come. And so we arranged breakfasts, and we arranged lunches, and we figured ways to help them, and we figured ways that they could help us. And we gradually built up a level of trust. So now when the lieutenant goes to these national conferences and he's asked about the model in the Julian Center and tell us really how bad is it? How does it work? Is it, as awful as we think it is? He can honestly say, you know what? It is 1,000 times better than we anticipated, and it's working extremely well. So we started with, and they moved in 1999. What's interesting about that is that year, in 1998, in IPD alone, the Sheriff's Department's numbers were not particularly good at this point, but in IPD alone, there were 16 domestic murder homicides in 1998. The first full year the unit was in operation in 1999, that number was cut to 7. And it has never peaked at 16 since. And the reason behind this is the notion that this self-selected unit, and this is the way road officers get from being road officers to being detectives. The first step here is through the domestic violence unit. They're self-selected, educated, and trained repeatedly on the dynamics of domestic violence and encouraged to be aggressive in reviewing domestic violence. They don't go to the scene. They don't go to the scene. That's what road officers do. But they inspect every report that a road officer files in domestic violence and determines whether more needs to be done, or whether the detective the road officer dropped the ball, or whether this is a particularly escalating notion. They have this thing they've developed called the index of lethality. That's cop talk. And what they do is they look at what's happening. Are there weapons involved? Are there specific threats to kill involved? Is there stalking involved? Were pets injured or killed? These kinds of things to determine in their own minds whether this violence is more likely to result eventually or soon in lethal violence, so that they can step in before it occurs rather than just picking up the pieces after the fact. They now handle over 3,000 cases a year out of that unit. And in addition, there's now discussion about moving the felony involving domestic violence. Right now, they're dealing with the misdemeanors. The earliest time that people deal with domestic violence in the road officers is when the first couple times that it happens, trying to intervene then and get help before it results in serious bodily injury or death. But they are talking about moving the felonies into that unit as well and expanding it, because they've been so pleased with the way that this system has worked. So now we have to find more room for them, because we now have space for 17 detectives, 4 sergeants, and a lieutenant, and 3 Marion County prosecutors at the Julian Center, and they want to move in more. But we are happy to do that because we think it really improves, that kind of collaboration improves the community response, gives the victims a chance at having law enforcement actually come out and help her. We do this, like we do a variety of different ways. When the police department has a problem internally, we call attention to it and we ask them to clean it up. We also do a carrot part of our carrot and stick routine. and that is we award what's called the LEAD Award, Law Enforcement Acts to End Domestic Violence. That's done at a quarterly luncheon that we have at the Julian Center, which brings in the judges, brings in probation, brings in the brass from the police department and the prosecutor's office, in addition to the unit that's there, and a lot of advocate groups from around the community. And a road officer who goes above and beyond the call of duty is awarded this pin, and he or she is awarded it in front of the chief or the deputy chief, by the chief or the deputy chief, gets to wear it on his uniform or her uniform, and we get them dinner someplace, and they get a write-up. So it's positive reinforcement as well. The kind of subliminal message on that to these law enforcement officers is, if you want to get ahead, you need to treat domestic violence seriously, and that's part of the problem. Domestic violence is so ingrained in every culture in this world that getting people to understand that it's a crime and that it's wrong is a difficult, difficult task. It is so much a part of our culture that it is going to take generations of education in this country before people realize that this isn't a private matter between a husband and a wife or a boyfriend and a girlfriend. This is an act of violence. And if a man did to his neighbor or his boss what he does to his wife or his children in the privacy of his home, we wouldn't have discussions about anger counseling. He would be locked up. He would be locked up, and he should be locked up. But we have to educate in much the way when I started prosecuting, and I hate to tell you how long ago it was, I did felony sex offense and child abuse. Back then, the jury spent their time looking at the conduct of the woman in a rape trial and wondering whether or not the woman did something to encourage rape. Was she out at a bar by herself? Was her clothing suggestive? Those kinds of things. It took a full generation to educate jurors and people in general that rape is a crime of violence. It's not a crime of passion. I had victims as young as 4 and as old as 98. The 98-year-old woman was an attempted rape victim in her own home. And as she's walking in the courtroom on her walker to get to the witness stand, she's still worrying to me about whether people will think that she's a loose woman. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine that? And I told her not to worry, that everything was going to be fine, and the jury convicted him in 4 minutes flat. The judge didn't have his robe off, and the buzzer sounded, and he sent back the bailiff and said, "You can't possibly have a question. You couldn't even have a foreman yet." They said, "We don't need a foreman. We have a verdict." So she was reassured by that, but I think that's pretty sad that those kinds of things were so ingrained in our society that she would feel the need to justify herself when she's attacked in her own house. We see the same thing with domestic violence. You know, the question on that is, why do women tolerate it? Is it something that they like? Is it something that they're used to? Is there something that they've done to deserve it? Those kinds of questions we need to, again, educate people about, because it's an important part of the violence in our society that we need to eliminate. People tend to think of it as between a woman and a man, and of course those are the primary people involved in it, but it's not only that way. Children are 1,500% more likely to be the victims of physical abuse if domestic violence is present in the household. But they're also more likely to suffer from anxiety, to run away from home, to fail in school, to commit violent crimes as juveniles, and to try suicide. It has a profound effect on children when the people that they're taught to love and honor more than anyone else may be trying to kill each other in their presence. We have a technique at the Julian Center called art therapy, and it's designed to help particularly young children who may have difficulty verbalizing what they've seen and are probably taught in the house not to discuss it as well. And so drawing them out about what their feelings are and what the condition of their mental health is difficult. But art therapy can assist a trained therapist in understanding, by both the way the child represents people in that therapy, in the pictures, and the colors used and the kind of design done, can give a trained art therapist a fairly good insight into what the emotional state of that child is. And I remember one particularly poignant one drawn by an 8-year-old girl. The 8-year-old girl was in the shelter with her mom and her younger brother. The father had beaten the mother in front of her and had threatened to kill the mother as well. And this child was asked to draw her dream. That's one of the exercises. Draw your dream. Now, we're talking about an 8-year-old girl. You might think it's a particular doll, maybe it's a bike, maybe it's a trip to Disneyland, or maybe it's her own room, I don't know. But this little 8-year-old girl drew a picture of her natural father in jail forever. When you understand the impact of that domestic violence on that child, you understand why we're so concerned that this has to be rooted out. Because the next generation is going to replicate their parents. She is 5 times as likely to grow up to be a victim of domestic violence as anyone else, and her brother is 5 times as likely to grow up to be a perpetrator of domestic violence than anyone else. That's why I am so pleased that the Julian Center's second stage or third stage of their mission, we have the shelter on site with the police department, and our counseling center is there. Our shelter holds, actually, as of the day before yesterday, we had 119 women and children in residence. 119 women and children in residence. We offer a variety of services there, including an IPS school that operates for grades K through 8, because until a court intervenes, the father of the children can take the child out of school as well as the mother can. And many times that happens, and then the child is used in a tug of war between the father and the mother. So we operate a school, we do health services in conjunction with both Riley and Clarion. We have a legal program in-house. We do a variety of services, but the one part of this we were missing, we thought, was the ability to interact with our victims long-term. Now, we offer counseling after they exit the shelter, but for reasons of transportation and lots of other reasons, people don't want to continue in that. They think they're cured, and they want to go on with their lives and shake the dust from their feet. But we have just recently opened at 34th and Meridian, opposite Shortridge High School, 71 units of permanent housing, ranging in size from efficiency apartments in the renovated building between the corner and the blood bank, and up to 4-bedroom apartments in the newly constructed building on the corner, on the northwest corner of 34th and Meridian. And while it's terrific to have good quality shelter available at an affordable price, and we don't have enough of that in this community, our primary purpose in doing that is to enable us to keep those children in counseling for up to 3 years. Because that's what it takes to undo the damage of what they've seen in the household. And if we're going to reduce that level of violence in subsequent generations, that therapeutic counseling for those children is essential, absolutely essential to undo the damage. So we're working at that level. We provide those services, we provide outreach, we provide human trafficking. We've tried to partner with as many partners in the community as we can. We use Training Inc. to provide job training for our women. We use Fairbanks for substance abuse counseling, because many times the victims that we see will have a substance abuse problem, partly encouraged by the abuser because it maintains the level of dependence, and partly it's because there is no self-esteem left after years of worn down. So we work with as many in the community as we can. We work with the Muslim Alliance of Indiana, and that is in part of the diverse group that we're serving in our community. It used to be that if we had staff that could speak Spanish, we covered the gamut. Now we have people from Africa, we have people from Russia, we have people from the Middle East, we have them from everywhere coming, which is a reflection in part of how much more diverse this community has become in the last 10 years. And because it is an equal opportunity offender, as the community, as diverse communities come to Central Indiana, victims of domestic violence from those communities come to Central Indiana as well. And so therefore, we're trying to reach out to as many as we can. Language can sometimes be a barrier. I have pressed my husband into service. He speaks fluent Russian. I've pressed my son into service. He speaks Arabic. I mean, we need a few more of people like that to pick up some of the languages that we are dealing with. But I think we've been able to raise the level of visibility of this issue in the community. One of the other things that we do, and we've done this in conjunction again with the police department, we have 6 employees of the Julian Center who drive police cars and carry police radios. And they are called to the scene of domestic violence by the road officers, not the unit that's in place with us, but the road officers who are there who think the victim needs some particular services. And they follow up with those victims to make sure that they have what they need. Do they need a restraining order? Do they need help relocating? Do they need a visit to our food pantry? Do they need a visit to our thrift store, Thrifty Threads, up at 86th and Ditch? And if any of you are redoing your homes, changing your wardrobes, anything else, don't forget Thrifty Threads. Our women and children shop there for free, and we sell to the public to cover the overhead. And let me tell you from experience working in there, there is no lamp too ugly to sell. So whatever you think you might have in there that may not be your particular treasure, someone else may have it. If you have any of those ugly polyester tuxedos from the 70s, you know, with the powder blue ruffled shirts, they go in a heartbeat. Anyway, just a little plug for that, because we're not in a position to do the kind of advertising goodwill, but our mission is every bit as important. So think of us when you think about those kinds of things. In any event, our advocates go to the scene and they determine if the victim needs something additional, can we provide it, and make certain that the kind of treatment that she gets by the responding officer is the kind of treatment that we want her to get from the responding officer. So we're very pleased about that connection too, and I'm happy to announce that the Department of Justice just refunded that program. So it's going to keep going. Yes, we just got word the other day. They had canceled it last year, and we scrambled to find the money to cover that, but they have re-upped, not the full amount, but a substantial part of the amount to allow us to keep doing that very, very important outreach in the community. So we do that. The counseling center continues to operate and treat the survivors of sexual assault, but we do have therapeutic counselors in the shelter for women and for children to assist them. We have a speakers bureau that goes out in the community and tries to educate people on the dynamics of domestic violence and also on human trafficking, because we think it's very important in any community to get the level of awareness of domestic violence to a critical mass. And when you get it to a critical mass, that's when you begin to change attitudes, both of people there, of law enforcement, and on the movers and shakers in the community who set the laws and enforce the laws. And we're getting there. We're not quite as far as I'd like to be, but we're getting there. We're in a position now that we can take issue with the police department or the mayor's office if something's happening that we don't like. We don't always get our way, but I don't think they disregard us in the way they may have 20 years ago, and think that we're not relevant and that we can't focus public attention on them, because we can. We work on doing that, and we will continue to work on doing that, because it's only when we stop being hidden away and come out in the public and say, this is a problem. It doesn't just happen in those kinds of families. It happens in every kind of family. And when we show people that, and when we tell them it's wrong, and we drum that into the heads of little boys and little girls, that that is not a normal part of an interpersonal relationship, only then do we begin to change the culture and stop the intergenerational cycle of that. And that's really what we are all about. It's been a long effort. When we started this, our budget was less than $1 million a year, and as you heard, 3.5, actually closer to approaching 4 million. And that's a challenge. We administer 13 government grants, which helps. We're a United Way agency, which helps. But we still have to raise $1.7 million every year to keep our doors open. It's a large operation, and when you're feeding 3 meals a day plus snacks to 119 people, that costs. And we try to also educate people on the notion that if we have 119 in our shelter, half of those will be children. Half of those will be children. People don't think of that when they think of a domestic violence shelter, but that's the reality. An individual woman by herself many times can find a place to stay for a period of time. But a woman with 3 or 4 children, who may need a couple of months to get her credit in order, may need to find a job, may need to find an apartment. There aren't that many friends that can have the ability to take someone in with 3 children for 2 or 3 months while that gets together. So that is the mission of what we do. We've encouraged other communities to do this. In 2003, we were named a Family Justice Center by the Bush administration. I knew nothing about it. I was invited to a press conference excuse me, at the White House, and I had a conflict and didn't go. And it turns out they named us the Family Justice Center. Now, I'd like to tell you that that meant that they gave us money. They didn't. They gave us $150,000 and said, would you mind helping to train 15 communities from around the country to go from having the advocates and law enforcement against each other into a model similar to yours? And those communities got $1.5 million to jumpstart their program. But typical government fashion, it was kind of a cookie cutter. They didn't demand that everybody have the same system, but everybody got the same amount. And $1.5 million goes a lot further in Sitka, Alaska, which was one of the communities, than it does in Boston, Massachusetts, which was another one of the communities. So they're trying to get other communities to recognize the notion that you can get law enforcement and advocates to work together. And that when you get law enforcement and advocates to work together, it improves the community response, lowers the murder rate, encourages prosecution, and generally means that the community is closer to meeting the needs of victims than they ever were before. And so they're trying to keep that program going and encouraging that kind of development, which is a good thing. At least it's a recognition on the part of the federal government that this is a problem and that it needs to be dealt with more effectively than most communities are dealing with it. It's not often that Indianapolis is in the forefront, or Indiana in general, is in the forefront of any innovations. Usually we're the 48th or the 49th state to adopt some particular program. That's not the case here. And because of this, it spurred other developments which are even more exciting. The Chief Justice of the State and I went to a conference a few years ago, and the conference was on interstate enforcement of protective orders. Protective orders are issued by individual counties. And when Clinton was president in 1994, they passed federal legislation that required states to recognize the protective orders of other states. Great idea. The problem in Indiana was that if you had a protective order out of Johnson County, you couldn't get Hendricks County to recognize it, nor Marion, and on and on and on. They were all different. So the Chief Justice went to this conference, heard this problem, convened the Prosecuting Attorneys Association, convened the Clerks Association down in his chambers, and worked out a way to revamp the code so that protective orders in Indiana, which used to be available for 16 different things, are now available only for domestic violence, stalking, and sexual assault. Everything else is a restraining order or a no contact order or something like that. But for those three only are protective orders available. And the form that's used, the cover sheet that's used for that, is now used by all 92 counties and the surrounding states. So that we no longer have the dilemma where one county in Indiana does not recognize the protective order of another. But as if that weren't enough, Justice Sullivan on the Supreme Court started an automation program for the state courts. It's hard to believe, but in the year 2010, each county has 3, 4, 5 different computer systems. So that if you want to get records for one thing from the county, you have to go one place, the other part, the other, it's a mess, okay, it's a mess. The purpose of this Odyssey system that they're implementing statewide will be to put all of the courts in all 92 counties on the same system. Okay. They're developing that now. It's expensive to do. Only 22 counties are done so far, but they are going there. But what they have done as a kind of a precursor of the Odyssey system is to establish what they call JTAC. JTAC is the, the system whereby all the protective orders issued in all of the counties are on one central registry. One central registry, so that road officers will be able to access from their vehicles. If the woman doesn't have the protective order in her hand when they come, they'll be able to access the parameters of that protective order and enforce it, even though they don't have the paper in front of them. Right now, when you have a protective order issued, it is immediately sent to the registry and keyed in to this centralized system. Eventually, when Odyssey is fully operational for all 92 counties, the protective order is issued in the court, it's automatically on the registry. So we are making huge steps forward in Indiana on the protective order front and the domestic violence front in general, in large part because we've had some people who have taken this issue up and really made the commitment of the resources and the effort to bring the groups together and improve the response. So we're not going to have the system where a woman's gone to the trouble of getting a protective order and she's caught someplace where she doesn't have it and nobody will enforce it. That problem's going to be gone. And I think we're down to the point where they may have all 92 counties, or they may be short 1 or 2 counties that they're just entering, but by and large, all counties in Indiana will be on this by the end of the year. And so that's good news, and it's also rare for us to be able to talk about the innovations that this state is doing. We're also tracking these much better, because in the 1990s, late 1990s, we finally instituted a statute called domestic battery. There was no such thing before. And so if the thought to write that it was domestic when he did his field report, it was categorized as domestic. If he didn't think to write that, it went into a black hole and nobody knew it was domestic. So it was hard to get a feel for the number out there. We now know that in Marion County in a given year we'll have between 22 and 25,000 domestic violence runs. Between 22 and 25,000 domestic violence runs. Just think about that for a second. How many man hours or women hours are used to deal with that? And why it's so important to get to the root causes of it, to try to cut that number down so that the police have time to investigate burglaries and robberies and other kinds of crimes that go on. But anyway, I think that we have a right in Indiana to toot our own horn that we are leading in a number of these initiatives, and we're very, very pleased about that, and we want to keep building on that. And that's why conferences like this, which help spread about domestic violence, are important. And why conferences on human trafficking are important, because educated people can recognize symptoms of domestic violence and help. They can avoid being judgmental. They can make certain that the victim knows the resources are out there. And you can make a big difference. Every one of us in this room, in the course of our lives, will interact with someone who's a victim. The statistics are there. We'll know someone, whether it's in our families or in our neighborhood or in our church or in our workplace. And the question is, what our response is. If our response is judgmental, she may stay longer than she would otherwise. If our response is supportive, without trying to put yourself between the victim and the perpetrator, it may make it easier for her to choose safety. And if she chooses safety, it could save her life, it could save the life of her children, and it could save or create a much brighter future for those children going forward. So it's very important that we talk about this issue and stop pretending that it doesn't happen in our kinds of families. And when we do that, we will begin to change the culture. And I would be happy to take questions from the audience. Did I leave anything out, Sherrick? Anyone have a question about the agency? Yes, in the back there. Okay. Okay. The question is the percentage on male. The percentages that I've seen, and I frankly think it's probably under range from 3% to 5% of the victims of domestic violence are male. We do some services for males. We do not take them into the shelter because we have communal bathrooms, but we do make arrangements for them for overnight stays. But I do think it's underreported. I think it happens more frequently. I think it happens in same-sex male relationships as well. And that's the next wave. First, we've got to deal with the 95% that are women, and then it seems to me if we talk through the idea that this culture of violence is inappropriate, it obviously carries forward in same-sex relationships as well. Anyone else have a question? Yes. Okay, the question is, can DV training be made mandatory for the judges? Actually, I just had a discussion with the Supreme Court about that 2 days ago. I think it would be a very useful thing. Our problem with judges, it obviously depends on the judge, and it depends on the community, but we've had some significant difficulties with judges who treat it in a very cavalier fashion. So I think that, yes, I think we need to work on making it part of their new judges' curriculum, as it were, and then also their annual training. We're working on doing that in the in-services for IMPD in Indianapolis, and also working on having it a regular part of the curriculum at the Plainfield Training Academy for all the other law enforcement. But it's something, it's something like, cleaning out your closet, okay? It has to be done routinely and periodically, because you're going to have people leave, there are going to be things that change, and it's got to be built in as part of the curriculum, and we are working on that. Yes?
I have seen that family court and criminal court never interact with each other. And I have also seen that kids are made to go and visit their biological father when there's a domestic case going on in family case going on in family court and criminal case going on in criminal court. So what are the efforts done to, so that both courts talk to each other and see that it's just not a divorce case that's going on, it's a control and power issue.
Okay, and the question for those who didn't hear it, I think, is that there's mandatory visitation when the father has been accused of domestic violence, may even be incarcerated for domestic violence, and what about that? We've worked with some of the family court judges on this, and there is a program in Marion County, at least, for supervised visitation. And by that I mean there's a third party who is the supervisor, not the victim, but a third party who then is on site when the father visits with the child, but it's under supervised situation. And I think that, again, with the education part of judges, needs to be done, because it isn't, I try to be fair about this. I'm not, but I try to be fair about this. Not every father who abuses his spouse also abuses his children.
But there's the impact. Just witnessing these say that if they don't witness, there's no impact. There is impact.
Oh, there's no question there's impact. There's no question there's impact on them psychologically and sometimes physically. And that's right. On the other hand, completely depriving him of any access to the children, if he has not physically abused them, is a step I don't think a lot of judges will take. So we have urged the supervised visitation so the child then has access, and what we would want to do with that child as well is to keep that child in counseling, to make the child understand what's going on, as well. It is a tricky problem with children, because as we know, if the spouse is protected, sometimes the anger is focused on the child, and we have had situations where children wind up dead because he can't kill the mother. So he goes and kills the child, may kill himself, but unfortunately he kills himself after he kills the child. So The dynamic of that is not just to educate, as we talked about, criminal court judges, but to educate all judges on the dynamic of it and the risks to the child, and hope that we can encourage supervised visitation when visitation is warranted, and that's not in every case by any means. In the, there were 3 that went up. Ma'am, you right here. Yes, in the blue.
Okay. On that line, in trying to, get the judges and the law enforcement community in general to get on board with some of the transition to make environments safe for children and families. I know some of the communities out there, in other states, are doing things like they have those gatherings that come to the court when it's time for sentencing. Make their presence felt in the courtroom. Because they want sentencing that's appropriate to the crime.
Right.
And so I was wondering, here in Indiana, and us doing anything in those areas of trying to bring our groups together, like ICAPB and DBN and the powers that be, Julian Center and the ones that are doing great work in the community. Are we coming together when we come to conferences and gatherings and meetings and plenary sessions and grant writing sessions to work on those kinds of innovative actions to push it forward?
There is some discussion of that. There is some discussion, and advocates do go with victims to court. And some of the judges, Judge Serto, who unfortunately is leaving the one court that we've had, has bent over backwards to make facilities available to our people, and just generally to be as responsive as he possibly could be. There are a couple of different things. There's some talk about monitoring judges, which is always a risky proposition, okay? We did that on rape in the 70s to try to get people to treat it seriously, and it has that effect, but I tell you, there can be a lot of friction on that, and you have to be realistic when you go in there. I mean, you can't demand a 50-year sentence for something that doesn't even result in serious. I mean, you have to work with the judge, because there are counter pressures as to how many beds there are in prison and things like that. So we're talking whether or not to do that. In terms of the rest of it, judges are elected in this state, okay? And we've had a couple of forums with judges where we made it clear that we were not pleased with that. And that didn't necessarily get the judge off the bench, but it got the judge out of domestic violence court. And I don't care what he's doing in environmental court or traffic court, okay? But if their attitude is cavalier, I don't want them dealing with domestic violence. So you don't, when you're looking at that and you've got a particular problem, and that can be both for the police and for the judges, because remember, the police are going to be answerable either to your elected sheriff or they're going to be answerable to the mayor of your community, and the mayor does not want domestic violence victims complaining that the police, that it's unresponsive. It's not politically correct anymore. And so I would not be above, and have not been above, if the truth be known, calling and saying, you need to get your own house in order on this, or we're going to do X and Y and Z. Remember, women are almost 53% of the voting population, okay? And this is an issue that crosses party lines. So there's no reason not to flex your muscle in that regard as well. Yes?
Are children required to participate in visitation?
As a practical matter, yes. If the judge orders it, yes. Now, what will happen is, if the child is old enough, the judge will take the child's wishes into account. And, once they're a teenager, who cares what the judge says at that particular point, because the teenager's not going to listen to, whoever he's living with. So, but yes, the answer is yes.
Isn't that re-victimizing the child?
I think so, yes. But the point is that you have a court order out there, and that goes again to the notion that judges need to be educated to what they're doing. It is a lot like where we were with many ministers and rabbis and all, and priests and any church group a few years ago, because, we were saying it's dangerous for the child to be in that home, and they were counseling that, you can't take the child away from his father or her father. And, it took us educating them. I said, you understand the danger the children are in? Do you understand the damage being done to those children? It isn't whatever God has joined together, let no man put asunder. It's get that child out of that house as fast as you possibly can. And again, that's education. And we've got to do it. We've got to keep doing it every single time with the judges. Yeah?
When we talk about prevention, I have really seen anybody talking about gender education,
Okay.
Start from schools, start from private schools, so that we have sensitive
Well,
boys and adults in
Cynthia Ganabi's in here. There you are, back there. We've been doing this at the Julian Center for years. The problem we've had with that is when we started this program, I think 13 or 14 years ago we started this program, I had to go school district by school district to get permission. Then I had to go principal by principal to get permission, and then teacher by teacher. It was not part of the curriculum.
What was the question?
I'm sorry. The question was education in the schools for or education for children for a prevention purpose. And we've been doing that, but it was very difficult to get that permission. Once we got it, we could go back. The problem is the Department of Education sets what's part of the curriculum for the state. And there are so many competing things that you could probably walk on water and juggle fire before you could get permission to teach that.
See, the kind of, I'm not working with many of the organizations, but the kind of curriculum they bring to school is sex education, teen dating.
Right.
Maybe it's like the way we name it, like, I'm just talking about gender education, not even, talk about violence and all, just making kids sensitive about gender differences and how sex difference is different from gender. It's social, it's a social stereotype rather than something that's biological.
Well, the issue is gender education. You're a little bit outside our mission. We focus simply on the violence part of that, and that's been difficult enough to get in the curriculums. We do it in boys and girls clubs. We have done it, and we will continue to do it. And I have actually talked to IMPD about using their cachet, as it were, to go to IPS and say, let's make this a mandatory program for 2 hours at least a year in area 5th and 7th grades. And so we're working on it, but nobody funds that, okay? Nobody funds that, because that's a term result, and all they're interested in is short-term results. There was one lady in the back, yes, right there.
To find out what specific resources are available in this community as far as what the Julian Center access to help specifically immigrant victims of domestic violence, like housing, health coverage, subsidized benefits. So what's the longer term? It's difficult enough for a victim of domestic violence, period. We have immigrant victims
Right.
of domestic violence. What resources do you have access to?
Well, we work, besides the, obviously, the legal program, we work pretty closely with Exodus, which is one of the immigrant resettlement groups. In fact, the current head of Exodus is the former shelter director at the Julian Center, and we work with them on that. In terms of the housing and the language barriers and jobs and all the rest of that, and then the legal question of the status of their immigration, those are all things we deal with in-house. I mean, we don't, when the stay is finished at the shelter, we don't just say, okay, your time is up, leave. We try to move them on, either in terms of jobs or in terms of housing or whatever their need might be. And it's no different for the immigrant population, except that there are some programs that provide federal resources that aren't available to domestic violence victims in that resettling. One more, and then I'm getting flagged that we're done.
The Julian policy on providing overflow bed space for women in danger.
Overflow bed space, I didn't catch the last phrase.
Women in danger.
Oh, we have an arrangement. First of all, we work with every other provider in central Indiana and email each other every day as to whether there's space available or not. And then as a backup, we do have We do pay for motel rooms as well, but when we're overcrowded like we are, we take the common rooms and we have roll-away beds. It's not, but it's the best we can do. I mean, we've doubled. We served 1,209 women and children last year, different women and children last year. And, you know, we could probably serve another 1,209 if I had a facility large enough to accommodate them. And we are expanding our shelter. We will have a few more beds as a result of this expansion, but we're never going to meet the need.
And if, just as a last question, could you, if you haven't done so, could you tell them about 34 North?
I did tell them. I did tell them about 34 North. I think we're, one more? Go ahead.
Carl, pretty quick. Do you have any programming or services for victims of, like, under 18?
The question is, we do an education program on teen violence. The question is, the children who are in effect emancipated without being legally emancipated, who may be living with boyfriends and domestic violence victims, we don't ask for proof of age. Okay? We're supposed to serve people over 18 like we're not supposed to serve illegal immigrants. Those are not questions we have a lot of time to ask. Okay? So if they come to us and we have space, we take them. Okay?
So,
thank you.